I know I've said this in before, but I need you to understand that your situation is a setup. I need you to start speaking to yourself and say that where I find myself right now, it's a setup. See, I want you to start believing this thing. I need you to confess this word. My situation is a setup for God to step up. My situation is a setup for God to step up. My situation is a setup for God to show up. My situation is a setup for God to glorify himself. My situation is a setup for God to exalt himself. My situation is a setup for God to bless me. My situation is a setup for God to bring restoration. My situation is a setup for God to provide peace that surpasses all understanding. My situation is a setup for God to bring healing. My situation is a setup for God to open the Red Sea. My situation is a setup for God to open the Red Sea. My situation is a setup for God to provide Jesus Christ into my situation. Until you come to a place, child of God, for you to understand that what you are going through is a setup for God to show up into a situation. Oh, Reba Kandarabo Sandarebo Kokondorobo, Reba Kandarabo Sandarebo Konderebo Sandaraba, Reba Konderebo Sandarebo Kokonderebo Sandaraba. The cross was a setup for Jesus Christ to rise on the third day. The cross was a setup for us to become born again. The cross was a setup for us to be co-heir with Jesus Christ. Whatever the enemy has meant for bad, God is going to use that situation to glorify himself. I want to encourage you, child of God, wherever you find yourself, I need you to speak to the spirit man that is within you, that it is a setup. Do not get discouraged because of where you find yourself in, because it's a setup, child of God. It is a setup, child of God. It is a setup for God to glorify himself. Your situation is not going to destroy you. When Hannah was a barren, it was a setup for someone to be born. When Sarah was a barren, it was a setup for Isaac to be born. I need you to understand your situation is a setup for God to glorify himself. Your situation is a setup for God to glorify himself. Your situation is a setup for you to testify about the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. When you have lost something, it's a setup for God to bring favor upon your life. Child of God, what you are going through, it's a setup for God to glorify himself.